Hello, little preface. Sorry for the delay on this particular chapter. I had a small issue with audio in the previous recording session, so I had to re-record this entire chapter right here. That being said, as usual, this is not perfection. This is not professional. This is probably going to be slurred a little bit here or there, maybe a couple stutters. I will try my best to slow down and read through it all. It is merely a story that I have not written, but I enjoy very much that I would like to share with you guys on this YouTube's format. That being said, without further ado, here we go. John Dies at the End by David Wallen. Chapter 14. John Investigates. 4:20 a.m. John had decided to go to the drain router job site early to get a good look around on his own. So while Amy and I sat camped out in my Bronco at the Unborn Donut Shop, John was rolling his caddy up the snowy road past Amy's house. He didn't get far, of course, arriving at a bundle of vehicles trying to unstick a jackknife drain router semi-tractor trailer. Now, I wasn't there, so this story is hearsay. If you know John, he'll take the details for what they're worth. Please also remember that, where John claims to have gotten up at 3:30 to perform this investigation, it was far more likely he was still up and somewhat drunk from the night before. John says he pulled up to the scene, which was roped off with yellow and black tape that announced it as a hazardous material area. Several guys in yellow jumpsuits were milling around and cleaning the scene with some urgency, so, of course, he immediately decided to cross the Do Not Cross tape. 2 steps in, John found himself standing on a faded pink stain on the snow, as white as a car. He deduced that this was blood, that the truck driver's body was gone. He stood over this large blood stain and said out loud and in the presence of several bystanders, "This is blood. David must have been here." At this point, 2 elderly security guards in parkas, the guys who normally work the front desk at the plant, asked John to step behind the tape. John claims that here he told the guards that he could not speak English, and when this failed to persuade them, he faked a violent seizure. I am unclear as to the purpose of this part of his plan. John flung himself down and began rolling around in the snow, thrashing his limbs about and screaming, "El seizure no es bueno," in a Mexican accent. Half a dozen pairs of boots came mushing through the snow toward him. From the ground, John saw something that stopped him cold. The semi-trailer was, according to him, bleeding from the ass. John saw gallons of red liquid running freely from the rear cargo doors of the truck, pooling on the red floor, or the road below. The stuff almost black in the moonlight. Several gloved hands seized him and dragged him through the snow, men in jumpsuits and protective masks. John squinted through the bustling team of men around the truck and saw several guys haul out a couple of blue plastic barrels, stained on the sides with the red substance that now seemed a little more like transmission fluid than blood, dark and thick and oily. Right behind them, several casket-shaped boxes were hauled out, the men carrying them like pallbearers. John stressed that these containers were not caskets, but were merely casket-shaped, coated with several stickers that seemed to indicate some kind of biohazard. Not the sort of thing you would use to ship bottles of a household chemical to the true local value. Or the local true value. Here's where things get hazy. John claims that the men hauling him away from the scene were escorted by other men carrying submachine guns, though when pressed, he admitted they may have been flashlights. Either way, John says the men threw him down and intended to execute him, at which point he kicked one of the men in the face and backflipped to his feet. He then wrestled away the man's gun and, quote, dick-whipped him with it. I am unclear as to whether or not this means he stuck the man in the groin, or merely slapped him in the same manner in which he would slap a person with his dick. I never asked John to clarify such things. Anyway, he said he swung again and slammed another man's skull with the gun so hard it made the batteries fly out. Next, according to John, of course, in one continuous motion he triple-kicked a third man in the face while shooting a fourth right in his damned cock. John, of course, knew that he couldn't leave that man just lying there screaming in pain, so he grasped him by the sides of his face and mercifully snapped his neck with a sharp twisting motion of his bare hands. At this point, John says the rest of the hazard workers noticed that what was going on and a chase ensued. He escaped by stealing a nearby horse. This is the first inconsistency in John's account, because when the story picks up, he is calmly driving his caddy back down the road, past Amy's house and away from the router plant. I suspect that in reality, either the men at the cleanup site didn't see John at all, or they merely gave him a dirty look until he turned around and drove away. Again, I wasn't there, and I do not wish to cast an unfavorable light on John's personal credibility. Undaunted, John turned off on a country road not far from the house. He wasn't the first to have this idea tonight, he figured, because there were tire tracks in the snow leading up, and John figured the last person who came this way was doing what he was doing, getting around the accident. A few minutes in, he became sure he was right because the road seemed to circle back around to the rear of the old industrial park, which contained the Reuter plant along with an abandoned Beans and Weenies cannery, a Best Buy distribution center, and a closed Hanes jockstrappery. Just across the highway from that was the abandoned undisclosed shopping center with its rows of decaying stores where the only inventory was mildew, bats, and squirrel families building nests out of used rubbers. The gravel road and fresh tire tracks that John followed took him through a narrow strip of woods alongside the Reuter property. It was while passing through the leafy, darkened canopy that he saw a flickering of lights off to his left, flashing between the tree trunks. He slowed and stopped, seeing bouncing white beams that had to be men with flashlights, maybe a half dozen or so. Shots rang out. The lights vanished, and John sat there for a few minutes before he picked them up again, farther down in the trees. He pulled forward a little down the road, peering into the woods, saw the flashlight beams stop and then blink out one by one. Whatever the men were looking for, be it a raccoon, a boil, or one of the guy's contact lenses, they had apparently found it. He peered into the trees looking for more activity, decided that the group could have been more redneck poachers or fraternity scavenger hunters, and stepped on the gas. The big caddy crested a hill, and when John saw what was below, he slammed on the brakes. A truck was down there. A heavy truck that looked military but didn't have a military paint job. Flat black from head to toe. This was apparently the source of the tire tracks he had been following. A group of men carrying what had to be rifles stood around the vehicle, and John immediately reached out and punched the switch to kill his headlights. Then it occurred to him that the lights suddenly going off might have been more noticeable, so he punched them back on, thought he saw two of the men turn toward him, and then quickly turn the lights back off again. Now he felt the strobing of his headlights was almost impossible not to notice. In fact, all of the men seemed to be looking up the hill at him. The group might have either pursued him or raised their rifles to perforate his windshield, had a gorilla riding a giant crab not leapt out of the woods and eaten two of them. You heard me. John said the thing was as tall as the truck, and walked on 6 legs that looked horned and armored like something seen at a seafood buffet. But there was a part that had the feel of a mammal, too, fur and arms. Please remember that from John's distance the beast would have been the size of a dime, so I won't criticize his crab-riding monkey description, even though we all know it's retarded. The thing crawled away, sideways, with the legs of one man still kicking from its mandibles. Cracks of rifle shots rang out, and little flares of muzzle flash lit up the snow at the foot of the hill. The men raced into the woods. John waited, then threw the caddy into reverse and backed far enough down the other side of the hill as to be out of the view of the army truck. Though he claims that from that vantage point, he could still see the truck, so that's probably physically impossible. Shots rang out from the woods. An animal screech rang out from the woods. Shots rang out from the woods again. More howls, and then more shots. Dozens, rattling over each other. Full auto fire. Screams. There was silence for a moment, and then John says he saw a single figure sprint out of the woods and head to the truck. The man jumped into the back, pulled out 2 small cases the size of lunch boxes, and ran into the woods again. After a moment, more shots hammered the night air. The bestial screams again. More shots. More screams. More shots. There was a low animal moan from the woods. The gunfire fell silent. John threw the caddy into gear and was prepared to drive past the truck before the men returned, but he was too late because here was the lone man running back. He was carrying the small cases, which seemed lighter now. He ducked into the truck again, emerged with 2 new cases, and returned to the woods. Gunshots resumed, followed by the screams of the monkey crab. This went on for about half an hour, and then finally the noises stopped. 4 men wandered out of the woods and mounted up in the truck. The truck pulled away. John followed. He passed a turn that led back to the Drain Reuter plant, probably to the employee lot, but saw that it was sealed off with a chain-link gate. If this had been an action movie, John thought, he would have rammed through it. Unlike a movie prop car, however, John was dependent on the Cadillac to get him to work the next morning, and a punctured radiator would cost a week's pay. But more importantly, the truck he was following didn't turn off at the gated road, and he was now very eager to see where it went. John hung far back, content to follow the trail of the tire tracks. They kept going through the main access road for the industrial park and across the 2-lane highway that intersected the road. The truck had continued onto the white canvas that was the parking lot of the dead undisclosed mall. It had circled around to the back of the eastern wing, one fork in the mall's U-shaped floor plan. John waited what he thought was a sufficient amount of time for the men in the truck to dismount and go wherever they were going, then cautiously drove around the building so he could see the truck parked near the ramp and boarded-up entrance of what would have been a department store had the mall ever bothered to open. John staked out the spot, saw nothing. He finally grew impatient and, being totally unarmed and without a flashlight or any kind of survival instincts, tromped over to a doorless doorway and walked in like he owned the place. The cavernous space was as cold as a meat locker. Some moonlight spilled in from a framed hole in the roof. The skylight that had the glass shattered out of it last year. Snow had sifted in down through the hole, leaving a coating at the center of the floor like spilled flour. Right across the edge of it were footprints, 5 or 6 leading to an elongated skid that John assumed was created by a guy slipping in the snow and falling on his ass. John didn't make the same mistake, circling around the dusting of snow and following the direction of the tracks. They led to a metal maintenance door, and John paused to wonder if maintenance of this place was the easiest job in the world or the hardest. He found the door locked and claims he picked it. I've never known John to know how to pick a lock, but I don't claim to know all of his secrets. Maybe the guys just left it unlocked. Anyway, John says he picked it, and inside found a small, dirty, windowless room that seemed to be home to a lot of spiderwebs and dark, scurrying shapes, but no exits. He flicked on his lighter and confirmed it. No doors, no hatches, no tunnels. Just like Amy's bathroom. The trail led there and stopped. John turned to leave, and out of the corner of his eye he saw a doorway. He felt like an idiot because how do you miss it right in the middle of the wall like that? Tall, arched at the top, ornate, totally out of place in a room like this. Then he turned to face it and saw that it was only a blank wall again. He turned to the side, once more saw a blurry glimpse of the big door out of the corner of his eye. There, but not there. Like an optical illusion. John went over to the wall and pawed around on the surface by the warm glow of the butane flame, looking for a lever or a seam or hidden hinges or something. After several minutes, he found it only to be a solid wall. He glanced at his watch, 5:06 a.m., and realized he had to be at the job site in less than half an hour. He left, guessing rightly that he would be back. 5:18 a.m. I alternately turned the Bronco's engine on and off so we would run the heater without poisoning ourselves with carbon monoxide, as I heard could happen if a parked car was left on too long. Especially this one, which smelled like rotten eggs from time to time anyway. I had always credited it to some sort of emissions problem, and I was sure it would remain even if I gave the truck a thorough cleaning, though I had never fully investigated that scenario. Amy's hair smelled like strawberries. She was leaning on me, her feet on the armrest of the door, the gun pointed somewhere in the direction of the glove compartment. There was a coating of white on all the glass now, as if a sheet had been thrown over the Bronco. For the second time that night, I had a very odd, weightless feeling that we were the last 2 people on Earth. I said, "Can I ask you something?" "Nope." "Why were you in Pineview? There's barely anything wrong with you. And I have a right to know, as a taxpayer." "The car accident. I missed school for a few months, had all kinds of problems when I came back. They had me on antidepressants and everything else. Wellbutrin. I bit a teacher and wound up with the crazy kids." "You bit a teacher?" She sighed and said, "Okay. One day, me and Mom and Dad were driving, going shopping for school clothes. I was 14, about to start high school. I fell asleep in the back seat and woke up and felt like somebody was shaking me. Then I was upside down, my cheek pressed to pavement, glass everywhere, blood everywhere. Dad had been thrown from the car. He died right there, 2 feet in front of me. His face was it was like a rubber mask, just nothing there. Mom was laying there, legs pinned under the hood, screaming. I was mostly okay, but my back was twisted around and my legs were numb. My hand was caught under a door and I just laid there and told Mom to calm down, that help would be there soon. We laid there forever, and I could hear cars passing. I could hear them, and it's like, why don't they stop? Somebody, you'd think." She trailed off, turned to look out the side window at nothing. "They pulled me out and my hand was like hamburger. Tendons and stuff curling out of it and just gross. I was just barely on, hanging by like a little strip holding it to my wrist. They're putting me on a stretcher and my hand is just dangling, swinging back and forth. Mom died at the hospital. Jim wasn't there, of course. He had stayed home, so he was okay, and he was freaking out like it was his fault. They did surgery on my hand, put it back on. Then they did surgery on my back where I cracked a vertebrae. They put a little metal rod right..." She reached around and pointed to a spot between her shoulder blades. "There. It made me half an inch taller. Isn't that weird? I had a lot of pain. They'd put me in traction every now and then kind of stretch me out and take pressure off it. And so the hand, it was a big problem. It worked for a few years, into high school, but then I lost feeling in these 2 fingers. Amy did something very creepy, which was to hold up her stump and point to a spot in space where the last 2 fingers would be. And they did surgery again, and again. The pain was unbelievable. that and my back, and I was on these pills, pain pills, every 4 hours, and they made me sick constantly, so they lowered my dosage, but those would wear off, and I'd spend the last 2 hours counting the minutes to pill time again. So I was having to live with either the pain or the puking, and I kind of had to pick. Antidepressants. The thought of this girl actually being depressed made me want to grab the whole planet and throw it into the sun. Well, more than usual anyway. And I bit a teacher. So eventually my fingers went numb again, almost all of them, and I couldn't grip anything. I was dropping things. They had me staying with Uncle Bill and Aunt Betty, and they were in the process of splitting up, and they didn't want me there. One time I dropped this glass thing, this little figurine, and Bill freaked out. I mean, it's not his fault they don't want me, but what could I do? He yelled, and anyway, the doctor said we had one last shot, one last chance to get the hand to work because the nerve tissue was dying off. She looked down and picked something off her sock. So they did the surgery, and I woke up in the recovery room, and I was half out of it, and I was dreaming that my hand was gone. And I woke up, and there it was. Gone. Just an empty space. White sheets where my hand should be. It looked so weird. I cried and cried and cried. Just bawling. For hours. They knew, David. They knew they'd have to take the hand off. And they didn't say anything. And I was just lying there, and I knew, all at once, that I'd never be able to blend into a room again, you know? I grunted. And no matter what I did or what I said, it'd always be, Amy, you know, the girl without a hand. Everywhere I went. And the worst part is when you, meet somebody new and they don't notice the hand right away. They don't see it. And you sit there talking to them and you're just waiting, anticipating the moment when they're going to notice. That look in their eyes at the moment they see it. Like they're embarrassed for me. She went quiet. I said, "This world kinda sucks." I left. I went and stayed with Jim after that. I can still feel the hand, you know. It's true what they say about that ghost feeling in the limb and all that. What, it itches or something? No, it's, clenched. I can feel my hand clenching, and I can't release it. Isn't that weird? She held up her good hand, squeezed in a tight fist. Like this. I can actually feel the fingernails digging into my palm, on the hand that isn't there. All on my head, I guess. Something with the nerves. It's like that all the time. If I really concentrate, I can make it let up a little, but it goes right back that way a minute later. That little twinge of pain is always there, a couple of inches into space where my hand should be. I wake up with it. I thought about telling her my own tragic story of the scrotal candle wax incident, but figured it wouldn't impress her. She crossed her arms and rubbed the cold from them, and I put my arm around her to help. The gun was on the floorboard. I said, I was confused when I first saw you, right? At the house? I didn't know where your hand went. Well, I still had it in school. But John knew. Well, yeah, she said. He used to come by. Let me tell you everything you need to know about John. The reason I was surprised by your hand was because John never once described you as the girl with the missing hand. 5:36 a.m. I don't know what John did in the intervening time between when he left the mall and when he showed up at the Drain Rooter roofing site, but from past experiences with John, I will extrapolate what he told as a series of humorous stories about his penis, drank some sort of off-brand alcohol, and sex with yet another girl who I secretly had a crush on but never got the courage to talk to. At some point, he also changed into his roofing clothes, layers of flannel and coveralls stained with tar. The semi-accident scene had been neatly cleared away by the time he passed it again. Only a flat of tangled tire tracks as evidence. Steve, the roofing guy, was already at the rear of the building, talking to his security guard about roof access. This was one of the guards John saw at the trailer crash site. He didn't know if the guy would recognize him or not, so he took a newspaper from the trash and held it in front of his face as he approached. Again, this is just what John told me, so, grain of salt. By 6 o'clock, 13 men in Steve's crew were swarming above and below the ragged roof hole. Working as snow and ice runoff poured many waterfalls into the Drain Rooter break room. The drenched carpet and waterlogged candy bar machine were ruined. John got on the roof and immediately saw that the hole was no ice collapse. Everything was flung upward. Debris and boards and tiles scattered on the roof like something blew out from inside. Tyler Schultz, a big blonde Nazi youth-looking kid who had jammed with John's band off and on, made the same observation and said, "Wasn't that some weird shit?" John told Tyler that frequently during sudden cold spells, the warm air inside a heated building will expand, causing a building to partially explode for much the same reason balloons will burst if you fill them with warm air rather than cool. Tyler asked John if he was making that shit up, and John said that he would look it up, knowing he wouldn't. John then took the stairs down to the wet break room, tape strewn across the hallways to keep employees from wandering in. The first thing he noticed was that the break room snack machine looked like it had been hit by a car. Glass smashed in and shreds of candy wrappers all over the ground. While the guys were stomping around above him, getting a tarp set up and shoveling snow away from the ceiling wound, John wandered around and noticed a section of hallway that had been blocked off with the same black and yellow danger tape he saw earlier. For the second time that day, John ducked casually across some do not duck casually across this tape and saw another hole, one in the wall, again like something blew through it, something the size of a car or a giant crab with a monkey strapped to the back of it. And at the edges of the hole, there were scars in the drywall like scratches. Claw marks. John leaned in and peered through the jagged tear in the wall. He saw a room that was clearly not on the floor plan. It was small, maybe the size of an average living room, and had absolutely no features. 4 bare walls. Then John turned away from it and, as he did, saw a perfectly round hole in the floor as wide as the room, going down. Way down. John said it was the kind of chasm thing they have in all those space stations in the Star Wars movies, for some reason. The ones crisscrossed with catwalks and no handrails. When he looked directly at it, it was not there. A tiled floor. Just like in the mall. So the crab beast escaped from here, but the crew of guys sent it to take it down and return to the abandoned mall. Everything came back to the mall, didn't it? John thought about Robert Marley, the soy sauce patient zero who had squatted in the food court, and about Danny Wexler ranting about invisible doors. John decided this whole thing required a shitload of further investigation. I splashed water over my face and studied my own bloodshot eyes in the mirror. Glad to be back home, back in my bathroom. I pulled off my shirt and felt something catch back there, something itchy. I turned to the side and looked into the mirror at my back. My breath caught in my throat. There was something elongated, maybe a half-inch long, protruding from my shoulder blade. Thin, like a needle. Pink. Thump. A knock at the door. I leaned in close to the mirror, examining the growth and reaching back with my fingers, afraid to touch it. A shiver of revulsion twitched in my body. Thump, thump. A muffled voice at the door. David? Hey! John's voice. What was he doing here? Thump, thump, thump. Hold on, I said, pulling up a hand mirror from the drawer in the vanity. I'll be out in a minute. I'm shaving my balls. I held up the mirror, angled it to see the thing on my back, and almost screamed. The little protrusion on my back was a stalk that ended in an eye, a tiny black slug's eye that twitched as the stalk began curling this way and that, as if getting a look around. I jolted awake. Thump! I was cold, a searing pain in my neck. I smelled the sweet but artificial chemical smell of strawberry shampoo flavoring. Come to think of it, strawberries don't have a smell. They just smell wet like grass. Focus. I felt something like a steel cable around my chest. I couldn't move, a weight holding me flat. I pulled my eyelids apart, saw a set of eyes peering down at me through frosted glass. I blinked, looked down and saw copper red, a head full of red hair on my chest, an arm around me, squeezing, a fistful of my shirt, twisting it. I was lying with my head against the door of the Bronco, window roller pressing in my back, feet splayed across the bench seats, boot resting against the door across from me. Amy, however, looked rather comfortable since she had used me to use as a self-warming mattress. She was curled up on top of me, breathing erratically, her eyelids twitching. Nightmares. Get used to it, kid. I craned my head and saw the blurred shape of John's face through a hole he had wiped clean of snow. He waved at me, standing there in full work gear. My watch, 8:07 a.m. My truck had died at some point because the engine and the heat were off. Amy and I untangled ourselves and I pushed out of the door, standing up in the refrigerated air, joints feeling lined with thick steel wire. I glanced back into the truck and saw Molly fast asleep in the back, paws twitching as she dreamed of clawing somebody to death. Probably me. John said, It's your first date and you made the girl camp out at the donut shop with you? You know they don't open for 3 months, right? There were 5 guys standing around outside from John, though Tyler was the only one I knew. They had come in 2 tall delivery trucks with Anderson roof and gutter painted on the side. I glanced at the strangers and said to John, We, had to leave the house. Shouldn't you all be working? John said, We had to get a load of shit from Home Depot. We've been fucking around for 2 hours. Passed by here and saw your truck. What happened to the house? Amy came around then, arms wrapped around that huge parka of hers, and immediately pressed herself up against me. "Hi, John." I'm freezing. She reached back and pulled my arm around her, saying, "Warm me up." I've got to have a word with John." I grabbed her by the shoulders and sort of sat her aside, then motioned to John to follow me across the parking lot. We walked across the edge of the lot, me squinting as my eyes adjusted to the light. John said, "You look like shit." "I'm burning out, John. Seriously. I don't know if I'm up for this. I feel stretched out, like too little butter scraped over too much waffle. And then it all falls down into one of those waffle holes, and there's none left for the rest of the waffle, and you sort of have to tilt it to make it run out. They got some seriously weird shit going on at the Drain Rooter plant, Dave. Mall, too." This was when John told me the somewhat dubious story of his experience at the semi-crash site and everything that followed. I saw his story and raised him our experience with the Shadow People. I looked back at my truck, where Amy was sitting sideways in the open door and fishing through her purse. She pulled out a brown pill bottle. "Well, there you go, Dave. It looks like the Drain Rooter plant is making more than evil drain cleaner. I'm sorry, it's making more than drain cleaner. In fact, you could say they're manufacturing evil." No, we couldn't say that. "I want to see where that hole goes. I think that monster came out of it." "We can't get into the place, John. There's 3 shifts at the plant working around the clock." We completed our circuit of the lot and arrived back where Tyler and the one other guy leaned against the truck, smoking cigarettes and sipping coffee from steaming insulated mugs. John said, "There may be another way." John told me about the mall and the ghost store that was there but wasn't there. Want to know what I think? I think all those secret doors lead to the same place. Hell, there may be doors like that all over town, like Wexler said. I nodded resignedly, sighed, and said, "Well, we're not waiting for them to just come get Amy again." "Abso-fucking-lutely. We'll meet at noon." "What happens at noon?" "We're done with the roof job. They just want us to brace it for now and cover it, keep the snow out." "You're still going to fix their roof?" "They paid Steve in advance, plus I really need the money." I noticed ghosts of exhaust rising from my Bronco. Amy had turned it on to get warm. I said, "I don't know what to do with her. That house of hers is 18 different kinds of screwed." I glanced at Tyler, saw he was listening intently, and lowered my voice. "She's got people watching her through the TV, like me." Amy saw us and emerged from the truck at that moment, a 24-ounce bottle of red Mountain Dew in her hand. She came up and said, "Can I have this?" "You keep that red shit in your truck now?" John asked me. "I think that's one of the 12 warning signs, isn't it?" "I eat all of my meals there at work. If you eat in your car, nobody tries to talk to you." John looked at me with something like pity. I said, "It's yours, Amy." She twisted at the cap, shoulders hunched against the cold. Somebody handed John a cup of coffee. John said, "Break time." "Shit, yeah," said Tyler in his dickish way, as he was wearing wraparound shades. He watched Amy as she tried to open the Mountain Dew bottle one-handed, trying to keep it still with her elbow. She concentrated on the task, grunting, the wet bottle sort of spinning in place. I asked John, "Where's the safest place to keep her while we do this?" Amy said, "While you do what? Can I come?" Tyler reacted to this for some reason, looking at John with a "when are people gonna learn" look, and then he spat on the ground. Tobacco spitting is kind of a non-verbal communication in many parts of the Midwest. He must have spilled his coffee a lot as a kid because he had one of those big spill-proof mugs, the kind that flare way out at the bottom. It looked like he was speaking into a megaphone every time he took a drink. I said, "We'll talk about it later." Amy dropped the bottle, made a frustrated sound like somebody stepping on a cat. I reached out as if to help her, and she slapped at my hand, then went back to twisting at the cap. I continued, "She can't go back to that house. I don't know if she has any money, but we can work something out. She can sleep on my couch if it comes to that." John eyed me as if to say, "Really?" but didn't say anything. Tyler got a sly look in his eyes and said, "I got an interesting story. My brother, he and his wife gave birth to a Downs kid. He drools all over the place. He shits himself. They made my ma babysit a few times, and then some more times, and then it was every night. Every damn night. You know what happened then?" "Your brain fell out?" I noticed Amy had stopped messing with the bottle and was sort of just looking at it, frozen. I said, "Look, I gotta... Listen, man, listen. They left the kid there, at Ma's house. They come by to visit every now and then. My ma, she's basically got stuck feeding and cleaning this thing now, every day. It's her job. Full-time feeding and... full-time job. She's got this thing to take care of because she wanted to be a nice person. It's like being in prison." Amy glared at him, like she really had something killer to say to him. Then she got this look on her face, sour, like biting an apple and seeing half a worm. She spun and took 2 steps toward my truck, then put her hand over her mouth and leaned over. "Tip, if you ever feel a puke coming on, do not put your hand over your mouth to try to catch it. It's reflex, but it doesn't work at all. Vomit kind of sprays everywhere, so Amy stood there in the snow, leaning over at the waist, her eyes clamped shut, her hand dripping, a puddle at her feet. It was an awkward moment. There were some comments from the crowd behind me. Somebody muttered something and somebody else chuckled. I walked to her and said, "Over here." I guided Amy toward the truck and sat her on the open door. "Don't move." I ran back to the rear door of the Bronco, opened it, reached in and grabbed a red and white flip-top cooler. This is my emergency kit. It contained a roll of duct tape, a spare pair of pants, an envelope with $200, 2 bags of dried fruit, 2 packages of beef jerky, 3 bottles of water, a roll of those thick shop towels you see mechanics use, a small metal pipe just right for cracking a skull with, and a fake beard. Look, you never know. I pulled out a bottle of water and sucked a shop towel. I went to hand it to Amy, realizing stupidly that she had no hand to take the towel with since she only had, the puke hand and the non-existent hand. "Here," I said. I took her arm by the wrist and wiped vomit from her fingers. Amy wrinkled her nose in disgust at this, but to be honest, I had never attended a party of John's where someone didn't either vomit on me or near me. I was kind of inured to it. As I worked, I said, when I was in 7th grade, I took Emily Parks to the fall festival. First time I had ever been anywhere with a girl. We wandered around and ate elephant ears and saltwater taffy and lemon shake-ups, all that festival stuff. We got on the Ferris wheel, and right as the ride's about to end, I lean over and puke in her lap. The ride slows to a stop, so they can unload all of the riders. And we wind up at the very top, waiting. She's sitting up there with a lap full of vomit, crying, and we're up there forever. Amy's hands seemed pretty clean. I tossed the soiled rag in the snow and gave her a new one and the bottle of water. I stepped back and said, I didn't ask another girl out until I was a junior in high school. 17 years old before I even held a girl's hand. All because somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew I would wind up puking on her. Amy didn't react. She drank some water and wiped splatters of vomit off her pants and her shoes, her fingers having to be frozen now doing wet work in this weather. I caught a glimpse of her face and saw that look, a familiar look, a sort of embarrassment that is almost numbing, like she wanted to dig a hole, bury herself in it, and let grass grow over the top. A warmth spread behind my eyes. Everything turned red in my brain. My skull suddenly filled with Tabasco sauce. There was a tingling in my gut, muscles tensing. I picked up the used towels and walked back toward a trash can in the parking lot near where Tyler and the guys were standing. I tossed in the towels and Tyler leaned over, whispering, "You're a nice guy, Dave, so all I'm saying is watch. That's all I'm saying. Watch out being a nice guy, because you can get fucked." A blink. A searing pain in my hand. Blood. There were arms on me, grabbing my jacket, pulling me, and there was blood on my knuckles and blood in my mouth. My jaws were clenched. I bit my tongue and tasted warm copper. Tyler was on his hands and knees, blood dripping from his nose and mouth, grunting that they had better hold me back because I was a fucking psycho and that I had broken his fucking nose. Then John was there, in my face, saying, Okay, back off, just go, get out of here. I looked down at my throbbing hands and saw the knuckles were split, like I had been punching concrete. John pushed me back from the group, looked over my shoulder and said, "Get him out of here." A fat blonde kid was standing over Tyler, looked like a bloated version of him, and I realized this was Tyler's brother or cousin or something. And the fat kid was saying, See what happens when you run your fucking mouth, Tyler? That one day shit was gonna get him killed because he was gonna say the wrong thing and some nigger was gonna shoot him in the back." John turned and joined the group, and I was standing there in the parking lot by myself, lost, disoriented. Tyler outweighed me by 75 pounds, and where I spent my days shelving DVDs, he spent his days carrying roofs up ladders. But the strangest thing, the sickening thing, was the urge that flashed through my mind as I was standing over him. The urge to bite. I knew this was it again, that I had lost time, that I had lost myself. Then I felt a pull on my jacket and the unique sensation of a handless arm reaching around my midsection. Come on, David." Amy circled around, her hand on my sleeve. "Amy, come on. It's okay. Come on." She started turning me back toward the truck, and I felt everyone staring. She got behind me and started pushing me toward the Bronco. "Come on, David. Take deep breaths. You're fine." "Amy, don't." "Nope. Come on. Keep going." Vroom. The last part was Amy making an engine sound as she steered me toward the truck, like she was driving me. She reached around me and opened the door, then pushed me into the seat like you see cops doing with handcuffed suspects. She slammed the door, circled around, and sat in beside me. We sat that way for a moment. I glanced out my window and saw the whole group watching. I reached up with a shaking hand to twist the key and realized the engine was already running. I tried to slow my breathing. I couldn't keep my hands still. Amy asked, "Are you okay?" "Just give me a second." "You kicked that guy's ass." "Amy, come on, let's go, before he gets up and beats the crap out of you." We got back to my house to find it ransacked. It was difficult to tell because I'm not the world's greatest housekeeper myself, but by the time I was in the kitchen, I knew they had been here. I don't normally keep the oven open. I whipped out the gun and prowled around the house, finding it empty. Amy asked what they were looking for. I dodged the question by pointing out what a pity it was they tossed the place because it was immaculate before they got here, and that it was too bad she didn't get to see it when it was clean. I went to the kitchen and ran water over my bleeding knuckles. "Look," Amy said from behind me. "They threw laundry all over your floor in there." "Yeah, and they wore the clothes first, the bastards." "And what were they looking for again?" A pause. I was on the verge of revealing what was probably our biggest and most dangerous secret to someone whom I had known for all of a day. I let out a breath and looked right into her eyes. The irises were too green. That was the thing. Like grass after a week of spring rain. And there was a piercing, electric intelligence in those eyes that I was too stupid to notice before, seeing right through me. And I suddenly had the very dismaying realization that I probably could not lie to this girl, for one simple reason. She was smarter than me. I said, "They were looking for the soy sauce. I know they didn't find it, though." "The what?" I didn't answer. I did a walk around the house, saw if anything was broken. It looked like they had taken the batteries out of my clock for some reason, and the glass fixture on my ceiling fan was cracked. Amy followed me around, pestering me with questions, suddenly desperately curious. The truth was I wasn't sure how to explain it. After about the 5th time she turned the conversation to it, I held up a silencing hand, made a shushing sound, and put a single finger to her lips. All will become apparent in good time, sweet Amy." For a second, I seriously thought she was going to punch me. I went outside and did a walk around of the house, glancing nervously at the tool shed and praying that the door wasn't going to be standing open. "What are you talking about, dipshit? If they came and took the body off your hands, that'd be a blessing." I noticed the flag was up on my mailbox. This was Sunday. I went over and opened it, found a palm-sized package inside. There was no name, no address, no postage. I stared at it with some trepidation, then peeled it open, thinking it might be the world's tiniest mail bomb. Inside was a necklace, a little gold cross on a delicate chain. I had seen it before, though seeing it close, I noticed that the cross was formed of 2 tiny nails, bound together by thread-like wire. There was a piece of paper inside, too, a folded piece of stationery bearing a cartoon puppy with a pencil in his mouth. The writing was in sparkly pink. "Hi, I had a dream, and an angel told me to give this to you. It's always brought me luck. God bless." Smiley. Signed, Chrissy Lovelace. All the I's were dotted with big friendly loops. Everybody wants to help. When I went in, Amy was in the bathroom running water. She emerged, stuffing Altoids mints into her mouth from a tin. I went to the fridge and said, "You want something to drink?" I have some fruity Leininkugel's beer and some kind of terrible plum-flavored liquor John's friend from the Czech Republic sent him. It tastes like the juice from a single plum was squeezed into a 50-gallon drum of paint thinner. The cans of Leininkugel's had masking tape on them with John's printed in ink. Amy looked around me and said, "John is protective about his beer, isn't he?" I put that label on there. When company comes, I want them to know the Leinies is his, not mine. "Do you want it?" No, I don't drink," she said, shaking her head and brushing the hair from her eyes for the 400th time since yesterday. "I mean, I drink liquids, not alcohol. I couldn't mix it with the pain pills." "So, who do we tell about the monsters?" What?" "All this, everything we saw. Who do we talk to about this sort of thing?" "I think the government has an 800 number, but you just get one of those automated answering things. No. John and I are going to look into it. Today, before they have a chance to come for you again." I closed the refrigerator and faced her, then told her an abbreviated and less retarded version of John's story about the Drain Rooter site and the Mall of the Dead. She said, "Why don't we just go? To another town or state or Canada? When's the last time you've heard of somebody exploding in Canada?" I shook my head. "Why not?" "Because we're under the eye, Amy. There are things you still don't know. The shadow people. They've spoken to me. They know my name. It's personal, somehow, with them. I think trying to get away from that by leaving, even climbing into a rocket ship and leaving the fucking planet, would be laughable. To them it'd be like watching a hamster trying to escape by running on his little wheel really fast. I picture the rest of my life, running scared forever. No, I can't. I won't. We're going to go in there, where they live, and we're going to go armed. I want to go. Amy, no, don't even try. I want to see. I have a right to. Amy, we're going into that place with the intention of leaving it as a smoking hole in the ground. Praise be to Allah. I know. No, you think this is cool. I can see it in your eyes. It's not cool. We do not have this thing under control. Let me tell you a story. When I was little, we had our sewer line back up, toilet overflowing and all that, so they had to come and root it out. And what they pulled out of the sewer line was a woodchuck. There was a break in the pipe somewhere, 2 joints that had pulled apart, and this thing had gotten in. Okay? I mean, to a woodchuck, this had to be the adventure of a lifetime. Hidden tunnel, seeming to go on for miles, so he's crawling and exploring and waiting to see the hidden treasure at the end, and then he gets drowned. In our poo. Amy nodded and said, well, that's sad. The saddest. John and I were the woodchuck. See, I can read it on you, that you think you're really a part of something now, that we're going to go do something really great today and change the world. Well, Amy, understand what I'm about to say. There's something terribly wrong with us, John and me. Amy, there are days when I'm sure that I'm stone cold, raving, batshit insane. That none of this is happening. That I'm raving about it from a padded room somewhere. And you know how I respond to that? To that knowledge that I may be delusional and dangerous? I arm myself with a gun. David, you're not... Listen, the only reason I'm standing up to these guys now is because I'm in a corner. I don't have a choice. You do. And if you make the wrong choice, there is an excellent chance that these are your last hours on Earth. All the things you wanted to do with your life, they may not happen. All the things you like to do, all the things you thought you might like to do in the future, all gone. And it'll be because of me, because I led you into my turd pipe. She said, why do you, hate yourself? If I knew me as somebody else, I would hate me just as much. Why have a double standard? Well, that's just stupid. I rubbed my eyes and sighed. I reached into my front pocket and pulled out the necklace and held it up. Here, it's good luck, or something. I went to Amy and reached around her neck, clasping the thin chain under her hair. I glanced out of the window, saw the snow was coming down again. Facing her, I said, you deserve some kind of normal life, Amy. I can picture you, in college, a family back home. Maybe you're working part-time at a music store. Geeky guys coming in and flirting with you at the counter. I could come in and make some kind of awkward conversation with you, and you could keep making excuses not to go out with me. And I would just keep coming back, and then you would get a restraining order against me, and my dad would get it overturned. Finally, you would agree, and we could go to a picnic or bowling or whatever normal people do when they're together. What do normal people do together when they're together? I have no idea. It's funny. Pretending that it's normal to have a conversation with somebody standing 3 inches away. She leaned in and... It looked like the world outside my window had lost its signal and gone to static. Snowing like hell, wind whipping it around. I leaned against my window, feeling the cold glass against my forehead, breaths fogging up a circular patch under my nose. There was a time when I would have found the idea of certain death a little comforting, like being on the last day of a job I hated. A weight lifted. Now, feeling the cold glass in my face and wet hair cooling my scalp and my mouth tasting vaguely like secondhand Altoids and knowing I would never see snow again, I felt a little like crying. But just a little. I saw the grill of a car emerge like a ghost, headlights faint in the whiteout. The big car swung into my driveway, John's caddy. Through the window I watched as John ducked out, wearing an army-issue fatigue jacket. He circled around to his trunk, popped it and pulled out a canvas backpack. He slung it over his shoulder, then pulled out a large tool that was unmistakably a... Is that a medieval battle axe? Amy asked from behind me, rubbing a towel through her hair. With John, we'll be fortunate if it turns out to be nothing stupider than that. The axe was a leftover from high school, when we used to be big into Dungeons and Dragons. Bear hunting. John burst in the door at that moment, dusted with snow, shouting, "We are gonna fuck that place up!" He tossed down his load with a force that shook the floor, then bent over and hefted the axe that I believe was one of the several props he stole from that medieval-themed restaurant he worked at for a while. He paused to let his eyes flick to mine and Amy's wet hair, and presumably asked himself if our showers had overlapped in any way. He was too polite to ask. Then he turned and stepped past me into the hallway. He studied the wall, then raised the axe and swung it into the wall with a thwack that sent plaster dust flying. He swung 3 more times, then thrust his hand into the hole he had created and pulled out a small object that fit in the palm of his hand. He glanced at it, wiped the dust on his shirt, then tossed it to me. I caught the small canister. silver, the size of a pill bottle. Amy saw it and asked, "What's that?" "You've never seen it before?" "Why would I? Big Jim had it at one time. We don't know where he got it, though." I quickly relayed to her the story of the weather guy and the mall and how we came across the container. "So," she said, "what's in it?"